Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my March stats wrap up for you, which is always very exciting. I really enjoy making these videos, so hopefully you enjoy watching them. So I'm just going to get into it without too much further ado. I read 11 books in March, which is pretty good. That's one more than I read the previous month. Not entirely sure how I managed that because I was working on one particularly big assignment and a lot of other stuff for college. I was doing some paperwork. I'm starting a research program in the autumn and I've been applying for funding and stuff like that. I'm really impressed. I mean, a couple of the books were quite short, but a couple of them also were quite long. So I'm really impressed with myself that I managed to read that many books. That was from, I say 11 different authors. One of them was an anthology of multiple authors, but yeah, 11 different authors or collections. The longest book that I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was my first time reading any V.E. Schwab and I really enjoyed this book. So that was 560 pages. That was the ebook edition I had out from the library, but I think it is still quite a hefty book. The shortest book that I read was called Writing in the Dust by Rowan Williams. This was a very short book that I picked up for one of my essays that I was working on. And that gave me a total page count for March of 3,110 pages, which is very slightly more than February, and it gave me an average book length of 282 pages. 9 of the books were under 500 pages, so earned me £1 each. 2 of the books were just over 500 pages, so I got £2 each for them, meaning my total earnings for March were £13, which was quite helpful because I had a pre-ordered that I didn't know when it was coming out. Turns out it came out in March, so that cut my budget down a little bit. So at the start of the month I was on minus £2.72 because of pre-orders that came out in February. In March I bought 2 books. The first one was one I thought I had an e-arc for it from NetGalley. Turns out it was actually just a sampler, so I had to buy the book because I wanted to finish it. It was a non-fiction book and it's a collection of very short biographies called Forgotten Women, the Scientists, and the sample only had like the first 5. I wanted to read the rest, so I bought this. I got this second hand and it was £7.17, but I'm really glad I did because the illustrations in it are beautiful. I'm going to be doing a review of this and another book from this series at some point soon, and I'll show you some more of the illustrations from that, so I'm really glad to have got that one. And that was the only book I was planning on buying. I didn't realise that this book was coming out in March, which is The Enchanted Crown by Bethany Atazadeh. This is the final book in the Stolen Kingdom series. I really love this series, I really love this author, so I'm really excited to have this. I knew it was out at some point this year, but I didn't know when. Turns out it was March, and so this was £11.99. So with the total I earned in March, that meant my total at the end of March was minus £8.88. So still not allowed to buy any more books at the moment. I don't think I've got any pre-orders coming in April, but I think there are a couple in May, so I'm going to try not to buy any books this month and try and get my budget back up a little bit by reading maybe some very short books to try and earn myself a little bit more money. The book that was published first out of the ones that I read was The Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross. Not this edition, but this book originally was published in Spanish in 1584. So that is, yeah, the oldest book I've read for a while. It's considered a bit of a theological classic. Yeah, it was alright. And then I read one book that was released in 2021, just come out. This was another book I had an e-arc for. So this was called The Carrilonger or Le Rimaldeur by Gabrielle Scouarnec. This book is going to feature again later. This was a bilingual book in French and English. And I'm going to say no more about it right now because, well, in fact, I am going to say more about it right now because this was my lowest rated book of the month. This got 2 stars. I gave this one book 2 stars. I gave 3 books 3 stars, and I gave 7 books 4 stars. So no groundbreaking books this month, no books that I really loved, but a lot that I did quite enjoy. So that's not too bad. The book that I read the quickest was In Dreams and Winter Rose by Nora Roberts, which I read in one sitting, essentially, read it in a day. It wasn't massively long, it was a very quick read. And then the book that took me the longest to read was called Interpreting the Psalms by Mark Futato, and this was one I had to read for uni because I did a module looking at the Psalms. So that took me 70 days, but that was because we were reading it during lectures. We were meant to be reading a chapter a week. I didn't quite always manage that, so I just finished it at the end of the month. So that gave me an average reading length of 21 days, which isn't too bad. Still less than a month, which is what I like that figure to be. There were about 4 books that I started reading pretty much straight away when I got them. 2 of them were ebooks that I got from the library, and the other 2 were 2 books that I've mentioned that I was reading for uni, which I started reading pretty much straight away when I got them either out of the college library or bought myself. And then 2 of the books have been on my TBR for a really long time. So the one that had been on there the longest was The Misbegotten by Katherine Webb, which had been on there for, wait for it, 2,369 days. Wow. So this was from the oldest books on my TBR list, as was the other one that had been on that long, which actually was Dark Night of the Soul. Hadn't been on there quite so long because I started reading it earlier. It was really good to get those 2 off the TBR. But that gave me an average length on my Goodreads TBR of 487 days, which is longer than I'd like it to be, but actually it does show that I've been reading stuff that's been on there for longer, so that's still relatively positive. 3 of the books were on my published March TBR that you may have seen. It was the first month I brought back my Cluedo Picks My TBR game for this year. Yeah, 3 of those books were ones I picked on that. The rest weren't on a published TBR. Where the books came from, one book came from NetGalley in its entirety. I've counted Forgotten Women as a book that was new because I actually had to buy a copy. So 1 book came from NetGalley, 2 books were new that I bought this year, 4 books came from the library, and 4 books were from my owned TBR, so that is a pretty good balance really. I read 3 ebooks, 1 hardback book, and then the rest were all paperbacks. For genres, I read a little range of genres. So I read 3 Christian non-fiction because that included the books I read for uni, 1 anthology, which was a collection of short stories, essays and poems, 1 contemporary, 1 dystopian, 1 fantasy romance, 1 historical fiction, 1 regular non-fiction, and 2 speculative fiction, which kind of loosely means somewhere in the science fiction fantasy realm, but not easy to pin down into that realm, if that makes sense. Well, at least that's how I class it anyway. All of the books that I read in March were written for adults. I didn't read any children or YA books in March at all, which is surprising really. You usually read a couple, but never mind. In terms of the publishers, this was a bit of a mix again. So 6 of the books were from Big 5 publishers and then 5 were from independent publishers, which is a pretty good balance. I like it to be about that amount. Okay, so author nationalities. 4 of the authors were American, 3 were British, 1 I think was Chilean. That was the author of the Carrilonger. I couldn't quite pin down exactly. There's not a lot of information about her on the internet. So I found out that she lives in Chile. I couldn't find anything else to confirm if that's actually her nationality or not. I've been confident enough to label it as that for this, but not to mark it as a read around the world, if that makes sense. 1 book was by multiple authors of different nationalities. 1 author was Singaporean and 1 author was Spanish. So in terms of the ethnicities, 1 author was East Asian, 1 was Indigenous American, 1 was Latin American, 1 was multiple authors of different ethnicities, 3 were white American, 3 were white British, 1 was white West European. So that meant for the author ethnicities, 3 were from authors of colour and 7 were from white authors, and then 1 was a collection of authors of different ethnicities. For the author genders, 3 were cis men, 7 were cis women, and then the anthology included authors of different genders, including non-binary and trans authors as well as cis authors. Okay, so for my challenges, I did okay. Yeah, I didn't do too badly. So 2 of the books were translated or foreign language, 2 of the books were for review, and then 2 of the books were from my oldest on my TBR list. So the 2 that were for review, 1 was Forgotten Women, the Scientist, and I'm going to do a double review later of that book and another book from that series. The other one was The Carrilonger by Gabrielle Scouarnec, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit and why it's not getting its own review in a minute. So for author diversity, 4 books included authors of colour, 2 books were from LGBTQIA+ community members. 1 book included authors with a disability. Basically, that anthology, I'm going to hold it up, where is it? On Bodies. This book on its own ticked every one of my author diversity markers this month because it included authors with disabilities, authors with mental illness, and neurodiverse authors, and authors of colour, and authors from the LGBTQIA+ community. So this book did some really heavy lifting. I did read other books that met some of those other categories as well. This book because it's a blend of fiction and non-fiction, but also a lot of it was about the author's own experiences, meant that I also ticked off all those categories for character diversity as well with this one book. A number of the other books also ticked off various of those categories too. Okay, so on to my favourite and least favourite books of the month. My least favourite, if you haven't already guessed, was the Carrilonger / Rimaldeur by Gabrielle Scouarnec. So this was an ebook I got from NetGalley in exchange for an honest review, and I am going to be honest, I didn't enjoy it. I picked this up because it was bilingual speculative fiction in French and English, and so when I heard it described that way, and the reason why I requested it was that I expected it to kind of flow between the two languages and be written in both, and kind of have the narrative told through both languages like at the same time in the same story. What it actually was the parallel text. So you had the story in French on one side and the story in English on the other. So that was immediately slightly disappointing. The author, Gabrielle Scouarnec, I'm probably saying that wrong and I apologise if I am. She's a languages teacher and she's a polyglot. Like, she speaks tons of languages. I had a look at her website and she sells books to help people learn a number of different languages, not just French and English. So she's clearly a really clever woman. The story just wasn't very good, and the language was more basic than the level that I'm at with French, and so that probably didn't help either, because that meant it felt really simplistic for me. So for someone that is just starting to learn French or English, if they are a French speaker, it would probably be really helpful. I just found the story itself to be A, not very interesting, and B, a little bit problematic. Some of the characterizations, particularly of the women in the story, were not that great. The point where it really lost me was when there was a false rape accusation, and then that whole plot line was unnecessary and not handled brilliantly, in my opinion. This was one of the speculative fiction ones, so it was kind of a dystopian setting. It kind of was based around this idea of like a lord of the manor and trying to protect his people within his keep, his castle. Yeah, it just didn't work for me, and it didn't live up really to the description. Not one I enjoyed. If you are trying to learn French, then maybe give it a go. But I mean, I think there are better books that would help more. I'm just a big advocate of reading children's books in a foreign language, and the reason she gives for writing these books is that they're more interesting for her adult learners than reading children's books. I think that's quite dismissive of children's books. You may remember that one of the previous French books that I read towards the end of last year was a kids' book in French, and I really enjoyed it. When I was doing my A-level in French, I would regularly pick up the Misbegotten books just because the language is basic, but it just helps you to get your head around how the grammar works in practice. And there's a reason why when you start learning to read in your own language, you start with simpler books and then build up. So I understand what she was trying to achieve, but I just think, just read a book that you already know it in English and read it in your target language instead. Anyway, that's enough about that one, and that's why I'm not going to do a full review on it. I've sent feedback on NetGalley. I've talked about it here. I'm going to talk about it as well in a recent reads video at some point soon. So it's had enough airtime. I don't think it warrants a full review on it because it's such a niche book and not one that I really want to recommend. So anyway, so that was my least favourite book of the month. It's quite difficult to pick a favourite book because I didn't give any books 5 stars and I gave quite a lot of books 4 stars. The one that I think is probably going to stay with me the longest, and maybe on a reread would possibly be upgraded, not definitely sure, was probably The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This, as I said, was my first time reading the Schwab and I really enjoyed it. There were just a couple of things that didn't quite work for me in terms of the story that meant that I didn't give it 5 stars, but I mean, if I gave half stars regularly, it probably would be a 4.5 star. It wasn't quite everything I'm looking for to give a book 5 stars, but I really enjoyed this. So if you're not familiar with the story, Addie LaRue was born in 17th century France, rural France, and she finds very quickly that her life has been determined for her by society. And she's not happy with that. She's quite a free spirit. The day that she is meant to get married and succumb to this rural provincial life, think Beauty and the Beast, she kind of makes a deal with the devil, which grants her eternal life but also makes her instantly forgettable to anyone. So she will have a conversation with someone, they will turn away, and then when they turn back they don't remember who she is. The story traces Addie's life up until the present day. It intersperses her history with her present. The novel was set in 2014 for the present day, and then it goes back and forth between 2014 and Addie's past. I wasn't sure I was going to like it because it is written in third person present tense, which is not something I generally enjoy in books. I tend to find it usually isn't done very well, and that separates me from the story. But actually, props to V. Schwab, this was done really well, and it really worked because the whole point is that Addie is quite transitory because no one remembers her, so she has to live her whole life in the present because she's forgotten, so it's like she can't have a past or a future because no one remembers her. So I really enjoyed this book. I do recommend it, and so I'd probably say that was my favourite book of the month. So I think that's it for now. Let me know if you read any of those books and what you thought of them. Let me know some of what you have been reading in March, and yeah, have a chat to me down in the comments about some of your favourite books recently, and if you've got any recommendations for me. I'm slightly disappointed that I didn't find a 5-star read in March at all. We'll have to try and do better in April, I guess. If you have got this far and you can't think of anything to say but you want to let me know that you're here, you can leave me an emoji in the comments, and we are going to go for looking back at the books that I read. A lot of them have quite a lot of blue on the cover, so leave me a blue emoji down in the comments if you just want to let me know that you are here. You can also like this video if you liked it, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Doing both of those things and leaving any comment really helps to boost my channel. It lets YouTube know that you have enjoyed watching me, and that is really helpful. It also helps me to know that you're enjoying my content, which is also really helpful too. So yeah, do both of those things. You can also connect with me on social media, and I always leave that information linked in the description box below for you. But that is it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!